Hello, everyone. Welcome to Off the Cuff, where the headlines come to life. We have with us Ahmed, affectionately known within many, many communities as Ish, and he is currently running as candidate for the State Board of Education, running a very active, very successful campaign. Ish, welcome to Off the Cuff.
Thank you so much.
It's always an honor to have you here. You are an icon within our communities, locally, nationally, and internationally, if I could venture to say that as fact. And you've done so many things within your career, and while I was looking at some of the things that you've done, and even just the things that I know that you've done, it was overwhelming to even think about, okay, how do I introduce this larger-than-life individual who's done so many things? You've had a concentration on education from ever since I can remember.
From day one,
From day one, that has been your passion. And you're actually a certified educator. That was your
Right.
your educational certification and career, correct?
Right. I graduated from the University of Michigan Dearborn with an education degree and was certified.
And that's where your passion for education comes into. And we're going to talk extensively about that. But what I want to talk about a little bit is your background, your humble beginnings, from Brooklyn, New York, to how you got to our Metro Detroit area. So tell us a little bit about that. It's intriguing. We talked a little bit off camera, but it's sort of an all-American sort of story.
Yeah, my father was Egyptian, and at 10 years old was told by his family that there was no food on the farm and he needed to find work someplace. So he worked on the docks. He left home, worked on the docks, and got on a overseas freighter, working on the freighter at 10, and arrived in the Brooklyn port and walked off, and nobody asked him a question. So he was an undocumented immigrant at 10 years old. He peddled in New York, and eventually met my mother in Detroit, and they moved to New York, and so I was born in Brooklyn.
And how did your journey bring you to this part of the country?
So that's interesting too, because my father loved Egyptian music and film, and in the 1950s there was a huge growth, renaissance of Egyptian culture and Arab culture, and so he wanted to purvey that in the United States, and the best way to do that was to come to Detroit. So they moved to Detroit, and they opened up a Arabic record store in Greektown, and I grew up behind that counter for a while, and I would watch people like Danny Thomas come in, and you know, he had his own Arabic band at the time, and others. And
Father knows best, Danny Thomas.
Yeah. And then that didn't work out so good, so he moved to Southwest Detroit and started a china shop, which also failed. And then we moved to Dearborn, and he went back to peddling. And you know, after that, my mother and father split up, and my mother later married a Yemeni auto worker. So I've got kind of a pan-Arab history. My mother was Lebanese, and grew up in Dearborn.
A rich community. Also someone that we mutually love and respect. Your grandmother, Aliyah Hassan, was really an icon as well, and very instrumental in founding of Access as well, something that you're very well noted for. But Aliyah, tell us a little bit about Aliyah Hassan. I mean, I've had the pleasure of knowing her, and what an amazing individual. But she was your grandmother, and really a pioneer in the women's movement as well.
She sure was. She was a kind of unusual thing in the 1950s, a Muslim feminist leader. And she, you know, she was a private investigator. Later she ran security for Bonwit Tellers on Fifth Avenue. She was a colonel in the civil defense, but her activism was the real amazing story. She helped to bring seamen into the unions, the Siemens unions. She organized Arab workers into the unions. She led the first demonstration at the United Nations in support of Egyptian nationalism. She was also a very active Muslim in the Muslim Federation, which was the US-wide Muslim organization at the time, and was asked to find out more about the amazing growth of African American Muslims. And so there were several kinds of groups across the country, and so she visited them and talked with them, and in particular spent a lot of time with Elijah Muhammad and the Black Muslim movement.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And became really good friends with Malcolm X, and then later helped set up his trip to the Middle East and his trip to the Hajj. And so they debated the question of should Islam include race or not, and Malcolm X more and more began to agree with her, and that put him in bad stead, you know, with some of the other folks. And so she actually hid him out when his life was threatened, and when he was murdered, she washed his body. So, and then, you know, after she retired, she moved to Detroit to get some rest and be with her family. And we immediately, a group of us went to her and said, we have started this fledgling organization called Access, which is now a national organization, 26 cities, millions of dollars, hundreds of people working at it. And she volunteered to be our first director and did so until she passed.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Well, you were very instrumental in creating Access, which is internationally known, and like you said, 25, 26 different cities. And I remember Access when it was a one-room entity.
So do I.
Literally, yeah, one room, one window entity, and now it has just riveted into this huge social services agency, which helps people all across our nation. So give us because I want to talk about your candidacy as well, but give us a little synopsis of that and the fact that you are basically named the founder and the brainchild behind Access, just creating something of what your vision was, and now looking at it and just literally larger than life.
Well, first of all, I don't want to take all the credit, because there were a group of people that helped to found Access, and I was one of them. I was involved early on. I was one of the first employees as well. I helped write grants and helped do the community organizing for it. And we were in a one-room building, basically, and people came in. We paid for everything ourselves, and you know, and volunteered our time, and we did that for several years. And it was probably 5 years before we had our first person who was actually paid. So, so I was very much involved in that, and later became the director of Access. I worked there for 36 years, and I think what I'm most proud of is not only the hundreds of thousands of people that we have served, and Access is still serving every year, but also that we were able to build community, bring people together. And it wasn't just the Arab American community. We made alliances in the African American and Latino communities with low income people, and you know, worked on issues that were important to them, whether it was mental health or immigration or whatever it happened to be. And so I did that for a very long time, and I did that with many, many other people, and I want to give them the respect for the work that all of them have done, and all those that are doing it still.
It takes a village, always, but it also takes a visionary, and I think your vision of bringing Access forward was very vital in the way that it expanded, and the vision of bringing different individuals onto the platform. And what I love about Access is it is the Arab American, community Center for Community and Economic Services, but it it opens its door to everyone and anyone of any religious,
Sure.
cultural background that needs assistance. And
Sure.
I think that vision really propelled access to where it is today, over 26 different cities. So
Right.
what an amazing venture, and which continues to grow. And you left Access as executive director to take on another position, and that was with, I think you left Access to go to the state as director of human services,
Right.
under Jennifer Grandholm.
Right.
And
I got a phone call from
right.
Jennifer Granholm, and she asked me would I run the department. And the department is bigger than the Ford Motor Company. I mean, it's a huge, huge department,
Sure.
And it does hundreds and hundreds of things. And at first I was hesitant. I actually went back and forth. We talked a lot because I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just working to maintain a bureaucracy, but really assuring that if I was going to put my time into that, that we were able to reform and change things. And
In typical-ish style.
I don't know about that. And, you know, we came to an agreement about that, and I reported directly to her, and we were able to do a lot of, I think, wonderful things in a fairly short time. I was there less than 4 years. That we were able to grow the budget of the department from, I think, about $3.5 million to about $7 million, billion, I'm sorry, $7 billion. And we were able to reach into programs at the federal level that were not, you know, not being used today. Yeah. So, but more importantly, we were able to do a lot of work around adoption and other kinds of child services.
And that was really your focus, the kids, more so than anything.
Very much
while you
so,
were there.
very much so. But also things like trying to increase the amount of money for food stamps. You know, $50 more a month for a family that doesn't have enough to eat is an important thing. And so did a lot of work there, did a lot of work with child care workers. So tried to bring in a whole set of reforms, and in particular honor the people who were working at the DHS. You know, there are 11,000 people and maybe 50,000 contracted workers, and the average worker, caseworker, had 900 cases.
Wow.
They were heroes. They were fighting to provide the things they do with not enough time to even go to the bathroom. And so I tried to spend a lot of time, you know, talking to people and having them understand the value of the work they did, and that they really were heroes. And so that was a great time in my life. I was able to make a difference for millions of people. And then, as happens in government, a new set of people came in and a new set of people went out, and I was one of those. I had looked at several possibilities. You know, one of them was to, you know, work for a foundation. Came close to doing that, and then looked at a couple other opportunities. But then talked to the head of the University of Michigan Dearborn, who really had a metropolitan vision. He wanted the university to be more than a great university, but a university that made a difference on the ground level, especially in the city of Detroit. And so, you know, I spent the next 5 years working to move that ahead. We had about 500 community partners. And in particular, I'm proud of a project that's still ongoing and we're growing, called the Public Allies Project. And this is a project that takes inner city youth between 18 and 24 years old, not going to school, not working, puts them in a major nonprofit, leading a major project, and gives them 400 hours of leadership training, and then gives them $5,000 to go to school. They get a stipend, they get health care, they get child care. Some of these kids have already been to jail or had other kinds of problems, but they've shown that they are real community leaders. And so the aim of that program right now is to place 1,000 public allies in the leadership roles across the city over the next 10 years. We're well on our way to doing that. So I'm very proud of my work there as well.
And your official title there at the University of Michigan was you were the advisor to the chancellor, correct? And the associate provost of Metropolitan Impact.
Right. So that was up until about a year ago.
Right.
I gave up the associate provost title because I was managing programs like the Environmental Center, the Labor School, the School for Local Government, the Office of Metropolitan Impact, and several others. And I really wanted to focus on ideas and moving the agenda. And so the chancellor asked me to stay on. I retired, but he asked me to stay on in a part-time capacity, moved me right next door to him, literally in his office. And I work with him and the deans to try to grow Metropolitan Impact. More working on the puzzle versus the management side of stuff.
And you do that as we speak. You still do that now?
I do. I've got several projects. I do that. I also work on a radio program.
Right.
Called
WDET?
Right, called This Island Earth, which opens cultures and music up to people. I also curate a world music festival called the Concert of Colors.
Absolutely. Now that was your brainchild.
Yeah, that was. But again, you don't do anything by yourself.
Sure, absolutely.
Hundreds and hundreds of people work on it every year. And
it's actually at the Fisher.
It's actually at the DIA, the
Okay.
Fisher, the Charles Wright Museum, the Scarab Club, and several other places. We all work
sort of
together.
A whole weekend kind of thing.
Yeah, it's got a relatively small budget, a couple $100,000. So the old saying is, when you don't have money, you have friends. And our friends came together to host it over a period of 4 days.
And I know that you're a connoisseur of music, and the Concert of Colors, of course, represents that. But what your work on WDET, because you've been doing that for ages, and that sort of encouraged the Concert of Colors kind of process.
Yeah, I've been off and on WDET and other radio stations. I think WDET is the right fit for me because they allow me to explore the music worldwide and try to make sense of it for people. So I'll play music from Detroit and South Africa and India in the same set. And it'll make sense because people make sense when you put them together.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Now, your bid for the State Board of Education. Now, coming from your background, you've worked with kids, you've worked the Social Services Agency. You're obviously into the arts, and you obviously have a background professionally in education. And the different things that you have been involved with. And Cranes said that you were one of the most connected people within within our state, and being on the Board of Education, those kinds of attributes are endless in regards to what you can contribute to that particular candidacy. What was your mindset in regards to wanting to be on the State Board of Education, and
Well, Three things motivated me.
Okay.
One of them is my wife. My wife works in the Dearborn Public Schools and runs parenting programs.
Yes.
And I've really been moved by how hard teachers work and how much, no matter how supportive the system is, they have to work kind of against the system to provide the creative work that they have to do. And so I'm a big fan of her and the work she does, but I also understand how much teachers give, how much principals give, how much local elected officials give. So one of the things I'm concerned about is assuring that we put the public back into public schools, that regular people, rather than a legislature that doesn't understand these questions, are able to make those decisions. I think the other thing that's moved me a lot is the question of access. I've said this before, and you've heard me. You know, just talk to any parent, and they're jockeying to get their kids in the right school,
Right.
because there's not equal education in this state.
And that's a problem with that. There's a huge
Absolutely,
problem with that.
absolutely. A lack of different kinds of resources, or lack of resources, different auxiliary
Methods.
supports, methods, and I think that that's a real problem. We really do need equal education. We also need early education. I think it's really important that we have universal early education and universal parenting programs. And that's, you know, most people think that's available to a lot of people, but it's not at all. We have to do work at that front. But there's another thing that motivated me in particular, and it's kind of a wider thing. This election really is a different kind of election. It really is. I've never seen one quite like it. I really believe that it's an election for the heart and soul of America. You know, and I won't be specific, but all of this anti-Muslim, anti-Mexican, anti-black, anti-gay, you name it, stuff is out there. There are those out there that want to take us back into the past or to the worst places that we come from. They want to divide, not bring people together. And so for me, this is a really important election. And I don't think you can run for office in these times without taking that on and speaking out against it. And as a person who's Arab and grew up a Muslim, you know, I think there's a place for us too in the decision making. And I think I'm qualified as much as any other person running. So I felt like this was the time. There was one other thing that moved me forward, and that was I was on the coalition to save the Detroit schools. And I learned a lot about emergency managers and a lot about the funding formulas. And I got to say, I was aghast that the Detroit schools were managed in the way they were. First, I'll give you one example, and that is developmentally disabled kids. You know, kids with abilities. You know, they make up a huge sector of the Detroit schools, but they're not compensated for the additional cost to take care of those kids. So it comes out of the cost of education generally. If you take that and take the deficit, which they pay the interest on, those kids, every kid in the school system is being cheated out of a decent education and the financing of one. And Detroit's not the only place. That exists across this state. And so somebody has to stand up to that. I think there are people on the board that are already doing it. I'm running in tandem with John Austin, the president of the board, because we believe the same things. But there are several other people on that board who believe that as well. And so I think the board is a really good bully pulpit to talk about these problems.
Absolutely, and I think when you talk about education for everyone, it is such an unbalanced platform, and you look at charter schools and the push for charter schools. Now, I'm going to give a little bit of my personal idea of this, but you're saying, you know, people are trying to get their kids into appropriate schools. Now, when you look at charter schools, I think that takes away that entire concept of, you know, education and the quality of education for everyone. And I know that there's a push to that. So to me, it looks like it's more of a business concept rather than an educational concept. And I know our governor is pushing that too. And when you look at, you know, you come from a family of educators, and so do I, and we see this firsthand, where the teachers and the principals are so bogged down with all this, you know, no child left behind, with the actual academics, or not the academics, but the red tape of doing this. So it takes away from education within the classroom. So what is your
So I get asked this all the time.
Do you?
What do you think about charter schools? And I guess, first of all, The most important thing is for us to focus on public schools, to strengthen them, to resource them.
That's the foundation of our country is public
Right.
schools.
I think that if you want a democratic country, you need public schools
Education for all.
and good public schools. And that's the first place you have to invest. I think the genie is out of the bottle on charter schools, but there's a lot that can be done to make it a more reasonable system. Okay, first of all, charter schools have to be held to the same standards as public schools, which they are not. They are almost not held to any standards. And secondly, charter schools need to be geographically assigned. There needs to be an entity that does that. So charter schools that are not making it, which is a huge number of them, shouldn't be there. We certainly shouldn't be putting additional resources into charter schools. And finally, they need to stop creaming. If you've got a developmentally disabled kid, they should have as much a role in charters and as any other. So I'm not completely against charter schools. There are some very good charter schools.
And we have one in Dearborn that's
Right,
very good
and I
too.
respect them. And I know the one in Dearborn that's a great school, and
Yes.
there are others. But I think they all have to be held to the same standards, and we need to cap them again. They removed the cap, and we've got them popping up all over the place, irregardless of where they're needed here or there. And so that's got to change.
What makes you the candidate for the Board of Education, or the State Board of Education? What puts you aside from everyone else?
I think I have a lot of experience, both in government and community and in education. I think I can bring that up to the table. And I also think I got a lot of heart. I have fought for these kind of issues my entire life, and I will continue to do that if I'm elected.
Absolutely. Well, you are the member. Just looking at your credentials is amazing. Board of Trustees, the orchestra. You are on the executive board of the AAI, National Advisory Board for the Museum, Board of Directors for Reading Works. You're very, very educationally oriented, and not a lot of people who actually run for these positions have that background. Board of Regents, Eastern Michigan University, Citizens Advisory Board, University of Michigan. You were on the board for Henry Ford Hospital. Again, you know, that aspect is extremely important. So the credentials you have, you have a bachelor's in education and performing arts, Department of Human Services. So I look at all these experiences, and when you're dealing with education and when you're dealing with children, you have to have that kind of vision. And all these things that you have done hands-on, not just talked about, but hands-on, I think really set you
Gosh, that sounds
aside.
like an endorsement.
Well, you know
Just
what?
kidding.
Well,
I'm just kidding.
I
know.
You know
It's public part.
that concept.
Yeah.
But just that experience is really important. And for me, when I look at the Board of Education, or I look at someone who's a principal, they have to have that hands-on experience of what happens in the classroom, what happens to these children when legislation is actually put forth. So that's really important.
I think that's true, but I also think you have to believe in things.
Absolutely.
And I think I have a lifetime of proving that I do, and working for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we wish you the best of luck in this candidacy, and change is always good, and I think you have that focus on the change that needs to happen in a positive way for our kids, because it's all about the kids.
Absolutely is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being on Off the Cuff. We really appreciate it. And thank you all. Go out there and vote. Your vote counts, whether it's in the presidential election or whether it's in Board of Education. Go out there, vote, make your voice heard. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.